In this video, I am going to show you how to knit a striped diagonal blanket. In the case of this blanket, the stripes are formed using garter stitch and stockinette stitch to create lots of really nice texture. And like my other corner to corner blankets, it's knitted diagonally from one corner upwards in a triangle, and then you decrease to bring it into a rectangle or a square, whichever one you prefer. Ever since my first corner to corner blanket video, I've had people ask if they can knit the middle section of the blanket using stockinette stitch. Now the trouble with that is that the stitches in stockinette stitch are slightly taller than they are wide. So that means if you knit the whole middle panel of this blanket in stockinette stitch, you wouldn't end up with a square or a rectangle. You'd end up with more of a kite shape or a parallelogram shape. Your blanket would lean. So this pattern is a happy compromise. It contains the garter stitch needed to keep the blanket a nice square or rectangle shape, but incorporates stockinette stitch that I know lots of you love to see in blankets. Now, unlike my other two corner to corner blankets, this one does involve counting rows. It involves decreasing at a very specific point in the pattern, so that makes it a little bit more complicated to get to grips with. So I wouldn't suggest that you tackle this as your first corner to corner blanket unless you are a relatively experienced knitter and you know how to read your stitches and you are confident counting rows. That being said, this isn't an overly complicated pattern. I'm going to walk you through it step by step, and by the end of it you should have a blanket that looks a little bit like mine. To knit a blanket like mine, you are going to need 400 grams of double knit yarn. That's light worsted weight or 3-weight yarn if you're not in the UK. You are also going to need some 4mm circular needles. Now you want these needles to be ideally at least 150 centimeters long, depending on how big you want to make your blanket, because you just want to make sure that you have enough cable length to accommodate all the stitches that will end up being on your needles. Then you're going to need your usual tools of scissors and tapestry needles to sort out your ends, and for the beginning of the blanket you might want to have a stitch marker just until your stockinette and garter stitch stripes become a little more pronounced. So this blanket pattern is built up of 3 distinct sections. The first section that we're going to work is the increase section, and that is where we increase width. Then if you are making a rectangle, you will move on to the middle section, and that section is where you build the length of your rectangle. And then the last section is our decrease section, and that is where we work the decreasing triangle to bring our blanket to a close. If you just want to make a square blanket, you can just work the increase section and then skip to the decrease section. You don't need to worry about the middle section of your blanket. But if you are working a rectangular blanket, then you will want to work all 3 sections. You need to pay close attention to where you start your decreases. So we will work our increase section together, and then I will show you exactly where you want to start your decrease, because if you don't start your decreases for your middle section and your decrease section in the right place, this pattern will not work. So it only works if you work your decreases and start your decreases in the very specific point that I tell you to do it. Otherwise your stitch count won't work and you're going to end up with a blanket that doesn't come together nicely and evenly. To start your increase section, you are going to cast on 4 stitches. And then before we jump into the main pattern repeat, we need to work 4 setup rows just to get a nice neat corner. For your first setup row, you are just going to knit all 4 stitches. For our second setup row, we are going to increase by 1 stitch. So you want to start by knitting the first stitch. And then into our second stitch, we are going to work a knit front back increase. So first things first, with this stitch, you are going to knit the stitch as if you are going to just knit it normally, but don't let that loop fall off your needle. Then you're going to grab your right hand needle, swing it round and over the stitch and pop it through the back of the same stitch that you've already pulled a loop up from. Then you're going to grab a second loop with your working yarn and then you can drop the stitch off your left hand needle. So you can see that we have gone from 2 stitches and we've added a 3rd stitch there. The last 2 stitches of the row you are just going to knit. So by the end of that second setup row you should now have 5 stitches on your needle. For setup row 3 you are going to knit the first 2 stitches, and then you are going to work your knit front back increase stitch. So you're going to knit the first half of the stitch, but don't drop it off your left hand needle. Swing your needle over the stitch and go into the stitch again from front through to back, pick up a second loop, and then you can drop it off your needle. Then the last 2 stitches of this row you are just going to knit. Our 4th and final setup row starts by knitting the first 2 stitches. Then once again you're going to work your knit front back increase, and then you're going to knit the 3 stitches left in the row. And by the end of your 4th and final setup row you should have 7 stitches on your needle. So you should have increased up from initial 4 stitches to a total of 7. And now we are ready to jump into the repeat that will form the increase section of our blanket. So we are going to build the blanket by alternating working a garter increase section and a stockinette increase section. The garter increase section is 12 rows long, and for this section you are going to work 12 rows in exactly the same way. You are going to start by knitting 3 stitches. And then, unlike in our setup rows, you are going to work a different type of increase, and for this we are going to work a yarn over. So it's really nice and simple. You are going to pick up your working yarn and pop it onto your needles to create an additional stitch, and then you're going to carry on and knit to the end of your row. Let's just cover that repeat row once more. So you are going to start by knitting 3 stitches. Then you're going to work a yarn over increase, and then you're going to knit until the end of the row. And you want to work that a total of 12 times. So that is the second time that I've worked it, and I will now go away and work it another 10 times and then come back, because we'll be ready to move on to our stockinette increase section. You might find it handy for these rows to have a row counter. There's lots of apps available. I like to use Crochet Studio, or you could use a manual row counter that you can buy. But if you struggle to count rows, or you're likely to lose your place in your work, then a row counter is a really handy thing to have, particularly for the first garter stitch section. The second and subsequent garter stitch sections are a little bit easier to work out because you can just count your garter ridges. I'll show you that once we get to that point. So now go away and work the 10 additional rows that make up this first garter stitch section. So this is the first garter increase section completed. It's a little difficult to see with the first one, but each garter increase section consists of 6 garter ridges. So you can see here we can count 6 up from when I start to introduce yarn over increases instead of these setup rows at the bottom here. Now it's time to move on to our stockinette increase section, and this section will introduce a right and wrong side to the blanket. So if you are not confident in reading your rows, then you might want to pop a little stitch marker on the side that faces you just before you start that first row of your stockinette section. Now the stockinette increase section is a 2-row repeat, and each stockinette increase section consists of a total of 8 rows. So you are going to repeat the 2 rows that I show you a total of 4 times. Row 1 of the 2-row repeat is a right side row, so you'll have the right side of your work facing you when you work it. You are going to start by knitting the first 3 stitches. And then you're going to work your yarn over increase and then knit to the end of your row. Row 2 is a wrong side row, so as your blanket grows you will have the wrong side of your work facing you. You are going to start by knitting 3 stitches. Then you are going to work your yarn over increase and knit 1 more stitch. Next, you want to purl your way across the row until 4 stitches before the end of the row. So that would be when you have 4 stitches left to work on your left hand needle. The final 4 stitches of the row, instead of purling, you are going to knit those last 4 stitches. So that's your 2 row repeat. You now want to work those 2 rows another 3 times, and by that point you should have worked a total of 8 rows. So here we go. Here is what a completed stockinette section looks like, and you are going to alternate between a garter section and a stockinette section to build the size of your blanket. If you want to replicate the blanket that I made, you are going to need to work a total of 9 garter increases and 9 stockinette increases. Once you have worked your 9th stockinette increase, you want to come back to this video because it is really important to start your decrease in the correct point, and you can't just start your decrease at the beginning of a section. So go away and make your blanket as large as you want it to be. I will work another couple of sections just to make this sample a tiny bit bigger, and then I will walk you through how you start your middle section, and in particular at what point you need to start your middle section. Your project will be bigger than mine, but you should have reached the end of a stockinette increase section at the point that you decide that you are ready to work either your middle section if you're working a rectangular blanket, or your decrease section if you are working a square blanket. If you are working a rectangular blanket, then you want this edge here to be as wide as you want the shorter edge of your rectangle to be. And if you are working a square blanket, then this side here will dictate the overall width of that square blanket. So you want to make sure that your width is as big as you want the blanket to be. Now, as I said earlier, it's really important to start your decrease in a particular point so that the stitch count works as we decrease down. So what you want to do once you have reached a point that you are wanting to move on to the next section, you want to work the first 6 rows of the garter stitch increase section. So you want to now go away and work 6 rows of the garter increase section that I showed you earlier, and then come back and we will move on to that middle section. The 6 rows of that garter increase section should produce 3 ridges on the right side of your work, and your first row of your middle section will be a right side row. Now what we need to do is to work the other half of this garter section, but we're going to work it so that we stop growing our width at this end here, but carry on growing width at the other end of the row. So for this part, it's a 2 row repeat. And for this first section, we only work this one once because it's half the size of the other sections. For row 1, you are going to knit 2, and then you're going to decrease a stitch, and we're going to do that by working a knit 2 together. And for that, you are literally just going to grab 2 stitches at once and then knit them into 1 stitch. Then you're going to work your yarn over increase that gives you that little peekaboo hole. And then after that increase, you are going to work another knit 2 together. So what you have worked in this combination of stitches is you've knitted 2, then you've knit 2 together, so you've reduced by 1 stitch. Then you've worked a yarn over increase, which has increased us back up by a stitch. So then to make sure that this row decreases by 1 stitch, we work that second knit 2 together. And then you are going to knit until the end of the row. The second row of our 2 row repeat still wants to add length to this edge of the blanket. So this second row is actually the same as the increase row that we worked in the increase section of our blanket. So you are going to start by knitting 3, work a yarn over increase, and then knit to the end of the row. What you want to do is repeat row 1 and 2 twice more, so that this section here has been built up to a total of 6 garter ridges. So when the right side is facing you, you are decreasing, and then when the wrong side is facing you, that is the end that you still increased your stitches. I'll go ahead and finish this section, and then I'll show you how to work your stockinette middle section. Once you've worked that initial 6 rows of your middle section, it's now time to jump into alternating your stockinette middle sections and your garter stitch middle sections. Both of these sections in this section are a 2-row repeat, and I will walk you through that 2-row repeat and then leave you to complete the section yourself. So the first section that we want to work is a stockinette middle section. So we are going to work a 2-row repeat for a total of 8 rows. Row 1 of that 2-row repeat goes as follows. You are going to knit 2, then knit 2 together, yarn over, and then knit 2 together again. Then you are going to knit your way across and knit all the remaining stitches in the row. The second row in our 2-row repeat is a wrong side row, and you are going to start that row by knitting 3 stitches. And then, because this is the edge that we are still adding length to, you are going to yarn over and increase a stitch, and then knit 1 stitch after that. Now you want to purl your way across the row until 5 stitches before the end of the row. These final 5 stitches in the row you want to knit. So that's row 1 and 2 done of our stockinette middle section, and what you now want to go away and do is repeat those 2 rows 3 more times so that you've worked a total of 8 rows. Once you've done that, come back and I'll just recap how we work that garter stitch middle section. Next, I'm going to show you how to work your garter stitch middle section. Now again, because it's middle section and we're decreasing at one end and increasing at the other end, it is a 2-row repeat rather than the 1-row repeat it was during the increase section. So for row 1 of that 2-row repeat, you are going to work as follows. You are going to knit 2 stitches, you're going to knit 2 stitches together, then you're going to work a yarn over increase, and then you're going to knit 2 stitches together again. Then it's nice and easy to the end of the row. You are just going to knit all the remaining stitches in your row. For the second row in our 2-row repeat, you are going to start by knitting 3 stitches. Then you're going to work a yarn over increase, and then nice and simply you are going to knit all the way to the end of your row. Just like with the garter sections of our initial increase section, this garter middle section consists of 12 rows, so you want to now go away and repeat these 2 rows another 5 times so that you've worked a total of 12 rows, and you should have 6 garter ridges after your 12th row. So if you go ahead and work the whole of the section and then come back, and I'll talk you through how you grow the rest of the middle section. So the purpose of working the middle section is to build length on your rectangular blanket. So the increase section built the width and the middle section builds the length. So you want to repeat your stockinette middle section and your garter middle section until this long edge is the length that you want it to be. If you're wanting to replicate my sample blanket, which is about 65 centimeters by 85 centimeters long, then I worked 2 stockinette sections and 1 garter stitch middle section, not including this half section that we worked here, and then I started my decrease section in the middle of the second garter middle section. So you want to work as many as you want to work, and then just like when we started our middle section, there is a specific point within that middle garter stitch section that you want to start your decrease. So if you go away and work your stockinette and garter middle sections as many times as you feel that you need to, and then what you want to do is work the first 7 rows of a garter stitch middle section. So you don't work the full 12 rows, you just work the first 7. I'm going to go away and work another stockinette section and then the first 7 rows of a garter middle section, and then I'll show you how we work that decrease. As I'm making a rectangular blanket, I have worked my stockinette and garter middle sections as many times as I needed to, and then I've worked the first 7 rows of a garter stitch middle section, and now I'm ready to start the decrease. If you are coming and making a square blanket, you will only have worked 6 rows of a garter increase section, so your decrease will start at the beginning of a right side row rather than beginning with a wrong side row. Aside from that, the process is the same. If you are making a rectangular blanket, we're now going to work 5 rows to complete this garter section here. If you are working a square blanket, it'll be 6 rows, but it is just a 1 row repeat now for the decrease, and aside from that, a square and rectangle blanket is exactly the same. Now that we are decreasing down, it is just a 1 row repeat for the garter stitch sections, and the 1 row that you are going to repeat for this initial garter stitch decrease section, which is just half of a section, goes as follows. You are going to knit 2, then you're going to knit 2 together, then you're going to work a yarn over increase, and then you are going to knit 2 together again. Then nice and easy, you are just going to knit every single stitch all the way to the end of your row. And if you are working a rectangular blanket, you want to repeat this row 5 times before you move on to your next stockinette section. And if you are working a square blanket, you will be starting your decrease at this end here, and you will need to work a total of 6 rows. Ultimately, what should happen is this garter section here should have 6 garter ridges on the right side of the work. So I'll leave you to work those 5 or 6 rows depending on whether or not you're making a rectangular or square blanket, and then I'll show you how we work our stockinette decrease section. Now that we've got that initial part of the decrease section out of the way, we are back to alternating our stockinette and our garter stitch decrease sections, and they are the same length as they were in all the other sections. So first things first, we're going to tackle a stockinette section. That's a 2 row repeat, and it's worked over a total of 8 rows. So you are going to repeat these next 2 rows 4 times before you move on to a garter stitch decrease section. So the first of those 2 rows goes as follows. You are going to knit 2 stitches, knit 2 together, yarn over, and then knit 2 together again. And then you're just going to knit your way along until the end of the row. Row 2 of your 2 row repeat starts again by knitting the first 2 stitches. Then you are going to knit 2 together, yarn over, and knit 2 together again. Now you are going to purl across until 5 stitches before the end of the row. So that will be when you have 5 stitches left to work on your left hand needle. So purl your way across until 5 stitches before the end of the row. These final 5 stitches of the row you are going to knit. So that's your 2 row repeat for this section, and you want to repeat these 2 rows another 3 times so that you've worked a total of 8 rows for your stockinette decrease section. After you've done that, it's going to be time to move on to the next garter stitch section, and I will just briefly cover that again because it is actually the same as we worked this section, but just for 12 rows instead of the 5 that we worked for here. Just like your other stripes of garter stitch in this blanket, the decrease section is 12 rows long, and for the decrease section it's a 1 row repeat, so you're going to work the same row 12 times. It's the same as we worked in this initial garter stripe, but I will just go over the row once more for you so that you are confident in going away and working it yourself. So you are going to start by knitting 2 stitches. Then you're going to knit 2 together, yarn over, and knit 2 together again. Then you're just going to knit all the way along until the end of your row. For the rest of your blanket, you are going to alternate these stockinette and garter stitch decrease sections all the way down until you have 7 stitches left to work on your needles. If you've counted your stitches correctly, that should come as you are finishing a garter stitch decrease section, and then once we get to that point, we work 3 rows in a slightly different way to give a really nice neat corner and finish off our blanket perfectly. So if you now go away and finish your decrease rows, I will meet you when we have 7 stitches left on our needles to show you how to finish everything off and get this from a project that's a work in progress on your needles to something that's a finished blanket and ready to gift. To finish off our blanket, we are going to work 3 final rows just to get a nice neat corner, and then we're going to cast off the 4 stitches that are left after those finishing rows. For the first of your finishing rows, you are going to knit 3 stitches. Then you are going to knit 2 together, and one of those 2 stitches will be the yarn over from the previous row. And then you're going to knit the 2 stitches that are left. For your second finishing row, you are going to knit 2, knit 2 together, and then knit the 2 stitches that remain in the row. For your third and final finishing row, you are going to knit 2, knit 2 together, and then knit 1. The very last thing that we need to do is cast off these 4 stitches, and for that we are going to use a really basic knitted cast off. As there are only 4 stitches in the cast off row, I will walk you through the entire process. So you are going to start by knitting 2 stitches. Then you're going to get your left hand needle and pop it into the first of those 2 stitches from left through to right. And then you're going to lift that stitch up and over the other stitch on your needles. You might find it handy to pop your finger here so that you don't accidentally slide this stitch off too, but you're going to lift it all the way up and over and off your needles, and you've gone from 2 stitches to 1. Then you're going to knit 1 more stitch and repeat the same thing. So you're going to lift that first stitch on the needle up and over the second stitch and completely off your needles. And then you are going to knit that final stitch, so you're back up to 2 stitches, and then repeat that process 1 final time. You're going to lift all the way up and over, and you'll be left with just this 1 loop on your needle. At this point, you can break your yarn, and you want to leave a tail long enough for you to sew your ends in. And then just to finish off, I like to lift and make this final stitch a bit bigger. You can get rid of your needles at this point. Then you're going to pop your finger and thumb through that loop, grab the tail and pull it all the way through the stitch, and then you are just going to pull and tighten that all up, and that is a relatively nice and neat corner that looks very similar to the starting corner. So that's how you knit yourself your very own stripy corner to corner blanket. I've chosen to knit mine in a variegated yarn, but you could choose to knit yours in stripes of different colour yarns by using a different colour yarn for each section, or you could knit it all in one colour. I think that this blanket would work for so many different types of yarn. Just a couple of final bits and bobs before I go. As always, I have left a free written pattern for you on my blog, and then there is also a link to buy an ad-free PDF if you'd like to take something away with you and print it out and not be in front of a screen when you're knitting. And last but not least, I'm going to link you to another blanket that I think you will enjoy knitting just as much as this one.